Now let's try to read about if-else block and how to create loops in Python. Here is the example of an if block. If block is made to execute some part of a code which you want to be executed if a certain logical condition is met. For example, if I say hi to someone, then I am assuming the other person will say hello in text. Similarly, if the other person says hello to me, then I will say hi. So how can we execute such logical condition in our code? We can do that by using if-else block. So if-else block actually also have an else if in it. So how it run is with the if keyword, we give the first logical expression, and if that logical expression is true, then the code inside the if block gets executed. All the other blocks will not be get executed if the if statement is true. Next comes the else if block. If the above if statement is not true, then the Python will read the logical expression in else if condition. If the else if logical expression is true, then the code within the else if block will get executed. Rather, if none of the if and else if blocks are true, then finally the else block will get executed. Note that you can write only one if and one else block, whereas you can write as many as else if block in a if else block. Let's try to code this and see the practical example with some code. Here is our file. Let's try to implement the code. We can say a variable, a string variable, say reply. And this reply is hi. If the reply is hi, we want to say is hello. So let's just first try to run this part of the code. We saved it. Now open the terminal and write python 3 name of the file hello.py. And in the result we got hello because this if statement was true. Now let's say if hi has two eyes. Now run our code again. We don't get any output because our code never went inside this if condition, and that's why nothing was printed. Now let's add an else block, and where we'll say if we don't get a high, then we should say bye. Let's try to save it and run this program. As you can see, we got bye in output because the if condition was not true, so by default the code went into the else block and the code present inside the else block was executed. Now let's try to add an else if block. Else if, we say it as else if, but we write it as ELIF, is a short form for else if. Now say reply is equals to 2 times I into the high. Then we will say hello there. Now let's try to run our code. And again, as you see, we got by in output. This is because our reply was high only. So none of the condition was met, even the if nor in the else if. So by default, the code went into else block. Now let's change this into high. Only the hello was printed because the code went from starting to end and the first if was executed. So it did not look for any other else if. So let's change this to one more I. Now hello there was printed. This is because the first if was not uh, true, but the next else if was true. That's why the code went into the else if block. Now let's try to add another else if block with the same condition but with some different result. We can say by there. These two conditions are same. Let's see whether the code will go inside them both or not. We only got hello there. This is because the else if condition was true here and the code stopped looking for any other true statements. That's why we only got one output. One thing to note that in our text editor, whenever we go from if block to the next line inside the if block, the text editor automatically tells us a place where to write our code. Like the print line is not starting as the same as the if position. This is because in Python, this is the way how you indent the code. This is just not just only for your readability, but this is how the Python wants the code to be. If I place this Python to be here, let's save this and delete everything. First of all, the code editor already told us that this print is an error here. Let's try to run our program. It gave us the indentation error. This is the indentation error is same as what we are talking about. The code must be intended as if we are going inside the if block right after the colon, then we should leave at least four spaces or one tab. One, two, three, four. It should be four spaces or two spaces or one tab. But in text editor like Visual Studio Code, it will automatically tells you the next position where you should write the code. So you don't need to worry about that. But you need to remember that these indentation are not just only for readability, they have some meaning. Let's save this and let's go back to our slide. Next, we have for loop. In for loop, we have an first thing is an iterator and the next is an iteratable. So to execute an for loop or to make a for loop, you need two things, an iterator which will iterate from starting to end position and an iteratable which will provide those location, the starting location and the end location. Here I is a variable which is an iterator whose value will get updated according to the iteratable. The iteratable here is range 5. Range 5 is a function which gives us the values from 0 to 5 without including 5. So the range will actually make the value of I to be as from 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. So the I value in every loop will the I value will start from 0, then when the for loop ends, the I value will get updated and it will be 1, then it will be 2, then it will be 3, then it will be 4. And when it reaches the 5, the for loop will end. So basically, when we'll run this code, because this for loop will run 5 times, the print hello world, which the program we wrote inside this for loop, or should we say the for loop block, will get executed 5 times. So let's write this code and see if it works like that. Let's clean this. We say for I in range 5. Now let's print our hello world. Now run our code. We saw hello world to be printed 5 times. This is what we expected. Now see how the I values are changing. Let's also print I along with that. So now we are printing the value of I every time in the loop, in the for loop with the hello world. Let's save this file and run this code again. We saw the value of I is actually increasing. It's going from 0 to 5. And when it hits the 5, the for loop ends. And every time it goes from starting to end position, the code inside the block is being executed. So this is how we write the for loop in Python. It is one of the most important thing and even in programming to write a loop because everything eventually you'll be using in for the for loop. So please try to remember this statement. For then iterator, the variable for iterator who will save the iteratable values and then an iteratable which will provide the starting and end position. Let's get back to our slides. Similarly, we have a while loop in Python. As for loop runs till it reaches an endpoint, we can create a while loop which can run indefinitely. So we don't generally want our code to run indefinitely. So to get out from a while loop, we use a break statement. Let's write the code to understand more about this while loop. The while to write a while loop, first keyword to remember is the while only. So while you use this while keyword, then until the statement or the logical expression after that while is true, the code will be executed. So let's fix this as true. So this is more fixed value. So our loop will continue and our loop will keep on running because this while loop is always true. So let's test this. X is equals to x plus 1. Let's define our x outside a loop. And if x goes above 10, then we say break. And while these values are getting updated, let's try to print them too. Let's save this file and run it and see what will be the result. As you can see, the x value in the starting was 0, and then the code entered inside this while loop, and this while loop also follows the same indentation as the if and else block were following. Similarly, here we updated the x values to be whatever they were earlier, added 1 inside them. So initially the x was 0. Here the value of x became 1. Then we printed the value of x. So we got 1 here, and we keep doing that and until the x value was greater than 10, which means when the x will be 11, we went inside this if block and we added a break here. Break is another keyword which we use to get outside of while loop. We can also use the same break keyword for getting outside a while loop for from outside a for loop. So break will always break any kind of loop. Here we are using it to break from a while loop, and that's why we only got values till 11. Let's try to use this break in our for loop. For x in range of, we can say 11, we can say 100. And here if we write the same thing, if x is greater than 10, we should break, and we can print here the value of x. As you can see, we don't update our x with within the for loop because x is an iterator now. It will automatically get changed after every time this code is run, and this code inside this for loop will run for 100 times. But we have added an if statement which says if the x value goes above 10, which means when the x value is 11, break this loop. Let's save this and try to run our code. Now we got the values from 0 to 11. This is because the range starts from 0. That's why, and then we print the value of x. The value which started was 0. Then at the end, when it reaches the 11th, when the x value was 11, it went inside this if statement, because if if statement was true then, and we hit a break command which broke the loop, whatever loop we were. Right now we were in for loop, that's why the code stopped working here and we only got the value from 0 to 11. Let's get back to our slides. So remember that break is used to come outside of any kind of loop. And with this condition, the true, which we gave as a fixed value, we can also vary that and can stop our while loop using that. Now let's write some function. If you don't know what a function is a thing which we write which minimizes the piece of code which we will write in future by making a piece of code executable with the function name. So it's something like if you have 100 lines of code and that needs to be executed for every 10 students or 10 students or something, which needs to be executed for 10 times. So we can write them inside a function, and when we can call these functions, that will actually run the piece of code again and again. But we don't have to write the whole 100 lines of code again and again to execute the same commands. So let's try to write our function in Python. Before writing that, we must know in the function we have two things. First is write. We use a define keyword to define any function. As Python is very close to English language, that's why The keywords are almost what we use in English. So to define a keyword, we use a def, 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 then the name of a function, then we use a parentheses, and inside these parentheses, we give, we use some arguments. These arguments are the one which are the variables which you can use inside your function block. Then when you give this arguments, uh, then when you call your function at that time, you pass the argument. So while defining a function, you were declaring arguments and saying whatever the x will be in our piece of code, we can do um, some math, some coding on that variable. And while using that function, we can pass these values to the x directly. So let's write our code to get more understanding of this. So let's say we want to make a function which adds two numbers. So we can say we can obviously do an we can use an and add operator, but let's try to create a function for that. So if we want to say add x comma y, when future we know that these x and y uh, can be integer or can be a float. So let's print x plus y. We have defined, let's save this and run our code. We don't get anything here. This is because we have just defined our function. It is ready to be used, but we haven't passed any arguments for our function. The value of x and y are still variables. So now let's use our function and pass some arguments to get the value. Let's say add x, and we can say x is 10 and y is 12. We don't have to actually equate our x and y here. We can just pass them at the position they were defined. Now let's write our code. Uh, let's run our code and see we got 22 printed. That is the sum of 10 and 12. So this is the place where we defined our function, and this is a place where we called our function. Now the function needs to be defined only one. We can call our function as many times as we want, and every time we can have a different value. And let's save our file and run it, and we get the sum of all of these numbers printed while we only declared this print x plus y once. So this is how we use functions. Let's write our function again when now we'll use a return keyword. Let's know what is a return keyword. We can say multiply x comma y, and we can say here x into y. Now, as you can see, we are not printing anything. We use a keyword called return. As in English, return means giving back. Similarly, in Python, return means whenever we run this code, in return, we will get this value. So whatever this value will be, the variable values which be in front of return, they will be given back to the main code. So let's try and create a variable called answer, and right now is 0. And then we can say answer is equals to multiplication of 10 comma 2, and then we can print our answer. So whatever, when this function will run, it will multiply the value of 10 and 2, and will return the value of 10 into 2, and that return value is equals to answer. So the answer will get up, the value of answer will get updated to the returning value, and when we'll print it, we'll get the result of this function. Let's run our code. So we got 20 here. This is because 10 into 2, the value got saved in answer variable and we printed it and we got 20. So this is how we use a return keyword. Let's get back to our slides. So this is how we define our function. Let's get to know more about these functions. Earlier, the way we defined our function, it might take a lot of uh, lines in our code, and in Python, write something in one line is quite famous. That saves your user's readability and actually your time to write that function. Imagine if you want to write an equation of line. In math, you can directly write it as y equals to mx plus c. So to make it more closer to what we actually do in math or in English, you can use a lambda function. These are also called anonymous function. They are just, you can use some simple expressions uh, and make a function from them. Like the line is a simple expression. You don't need to create a whole function to get the value of y value for every x in a line. So we can write a lambda function instead of the whole defined function, and we will have the same function which we want. And defining the function like using the lambda keyword, and those functions are known as lambda functions. Now let's open our text editor and write our lambda function. So write we can write the same line expression as we know line is equals to mx plus c, but we cannot directly write like this. So let's create this as a lambda expression or a lambda function. So y will be finally the function, the name of the function. Then we use a lambda keyword. Then after that, we don't need to give a parentheses. We can directly give the variables which we will be using in our expression. So to write a line, we need a value of slope, m, then value of x, then a constant. Then we can say this value is will be equals to the whatever y for particular m, x, and c will be m into x plus c as the equation of line. And now let's print our function value for some m and x and c. Let's say our m is 1 and x is 1 and c is also 1. So for y should be m1 into 1 plus 1, it should be 2. So in result, we should get 2. So we got result to be 2. So this is how we write our lambda functions. Let's get back to our slide. So lambda was a keyword here, and the arguments were given right after the lambda keyword, and the final expression was given after those arguments like this.